Back at Lucas Oil Stadium from Big Ten Media Days, it's Buckeye Talk. I'm Nathan Baird with Stephen Means and Doug Lesmerises. Ryan Day, on a couple occasions today, asked a lot of questions about his defense, and he said, kind of doubled down on it. He thinks this should be a top 10 defense, not just a better defense in 2022, but that's the goal, to get back to being a top 10 defense. Doug, you have some numbers on exactly what that means relative to where Ohio State was last season in 2021 when defense was the reason they didn't make the playoff.
So I think in the modern age, a lot of the basic stats don't really reflect where a defense stands, but also I do think they still are a shorthand, even for a coach like Ryan Day. Last year, Ohio State in yards allowed per game ranked 59th. In points allowed per game, which to me is more important, they were 38th. And then a Football Outsiders metric called FEI that is sort of like a more comprehensive, takes a lot of things into account. They were 42nd. So it's 38, 42, 59. None of that is top 10. And again, just for reference, in 2019, last time the Ohio State defense was good, they were 4th in the nation in points allowed per game. They gave up 13.7 points in 2019 and were 4th. Last year they gave up 22.8 points per game, so 9 more points to game, and they were 38th. That's the context.
Put a pin in 2019 because they're coming back to that. But, Steven, just the basic concept of, is this defense talented enough, and is the coaching staff now talented enough to take this from where it was last year, 40s, 50s, kind of hovering around in a very kind of mediocre place? Can it be a top 10 defense in 2022?
Sure. There's enough guys that you have some type of, hope in, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, that if they pop, maybe they're a top 10 defense in the country. Guys like JT Tuimoloau, guys like Jack Sawyer, guys like Denzel Burke, guys like, Kai Stokes, or even a healthy Josh Proctor, Ronnie Hickman, who was at Big Ten Media Days. If all these guys kind of reach what their potential ceiling is supposed to be in their respective years, and sure, this is a top 10 defense when you mix that with the creative mind that Jim Knowles is.
So Ryan Day brought up 2019, and I can't remember if he brought it up himself or if other people brought it up and he agreed. But I started to think maybe there are some parallels here. You've got a first year of an install of a new defense. You were bringing in Jeff Hafley that year as a co-defensive coordinator, and he was the one kind of calling things. You had a lot of guys going from their second to third year, Chase Young, Jeff Okudah, and guys who had already shown that there was probably something special there and it needed to take the next step, and then it did in the case of those guys who were the second and third picks in the draft. When you heard that comparison to 2019, considering how rough it was last year, did it sound like still a reasonable comparison to make to you, Doug? I mean, because you saw also the other thing about 2019 was that 2018 was like the worst defensive season in Ohio State history in the last 50 years.
Yeah, no, I would say, because as we've talked a lot, the juice for this team and this defense especially is really second-year guys. And as you said, like Chase Young, Jeff Okudah, those were third-year guys. And frankly, I remember, asking Chase Young going into year 2, like, hey, and he was like, yeah, here we go. And then, it kind of didn't happen. That, again, in 2013, it did happen with second-year guys. So it's not impossible, and JT, we all think JT is going to be good, but man, Chase Young in 2019 was woo, baby. And so the rest of it I get, right? Jeff Hafley in year 1, Jim Knowles in year 1. I still think the overall talent on that defense was better than this defense. So I think if people use 2019, if a fan uses 2019 as a reference too much, I think you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. I think they can be solid and good and much better, but I would not use 19 as the comparison.
I would agree with that because I don't think what you saw from some of these guys, even guys that we have talked about as being potentially special, JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, even Jack Sawyer, you didn't see them on the cusp of something, I think, amazing in the next year. I think it was like, oh, look at the progression they're going to be on. What will 2023 be like? 2022 being exceptional would be really ahead of schedule for them.
So Chase Young was so good in 2019 that we forget how good he was in 2018. He had 10.5 sacks. If JT has 10.5 sacks with a better secondary especially, I think that's what was part of it. Is Chase Young was really good in 2018, but the secondary sucked, so it really didn't matter. If there's a more quality secondary, if the back end's a little bit better and JT has 10.5 sacks, I don't know if it's top 10, but it might flirt with it.
The one thing where Ryan Day, I think, can make the comparison too is 2018, the undoing of that team was not being able to stop the run in a lot of ways. That was the worst run defense Ohio State's had in a long time. Linebacker was a problem. 2019, that got fixed in a big way. So again, it's tough, I think, to compare, as you're saying, Doug, from a talent standpoint, but the end result, you can make a comparison that they have to make that same progression as far as stopping the run to make a lot of other things with this defense work.
So, like in a top 10 conversation, last year Ohio State gave up 22.8 points per game, and that was 38th. Baylor was 10th in the nation in points allowed last year, and they gave up 18.3 per game. So that's only 4.5 fewer points per game. Ohio State in 2019 gave up 13.7. So do I think Ohio State can go from giving up 22.8 points to giving up 13.7 points? No, I don't. Can they go from 22.8 to 18.3? Yeah, I think they could. I think they could give up half a touchdown less per game. So, and like the stats matter, but like, are you, like the thing about, yes, Chase Young was good in 2018. In 2019, he destroyed games. Are they going to destroy games? Do they have guys who are going to destroy games? I don't know. I think they'll have guys who are good. So I thought we've talked a lot about probably top 25 is good enough for this defense. So I thought it was interesting that they threw out something like top 10. But it's kind of his point was, well, we expect it on offense. Why shouldn't we expect it on defense? And the answer is because you're not as good on defense. Still, you're going to be better, but you're still not as good as your offense because you're the best offense in the country.
But I think you also make a good point that underlies this whole thing, which is they don't have to be a top 10 defense potentially to be a championship team, but they can't be a 40th, 50th defense and still end up a championship team. Much more about this on Buckeye Talk. We'll be potting as soon as we get done recording this, basically. And get the text, 614-350-3315. Now that we're on the verge of training camp starting, we'll be texting a lot from Buckeye Talk.